Again, thank you all so much for being here. And again, I imagine the more folks will join us shortly. But for now, this is an NTAC session, so welcome to it. And this is Centering Youth in Crisis Response Systems as Users and Designers. We're just so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And before we get started, we do have a few just little intro items to go over with you, but would also love to learn more about you in this space. So we don't have time for like round robin introductions off mute. However, if you would like to take a minute and go into our Zoom chat and share your name, if you'd like to repeat it, your organization, your role, and where you're located, please feel free to do so. We can break some ice in the chat. And in addition, if you are a young person with lived experience or a family member of a young person with lived experience navigating these crisis response services, please feel free to share that rather than a role or organization. However you feel comfortable introducing yourself and sharing in the chat is totally up to you. All right, so as always, with all NTAC sessions, we need to provide just the following disclaimer, right? So this presentation was prepared by NTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. And while this event is supported by SAMHSA, the contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the US government. And in terms of session security, should be A-okay. But if there are any security issues that come up for us, this session will immediately end and you will be notified by email on how to rejoin a new session. I always want to give creds where they're due. So again, thank you for being here. And listed here are all of our incredible national partners who have come together to utilize their expertise and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the youth serving support field, right? By creating products, resources, and sessions like this one to enhance the behavioral and mental health fields, as well as other youth serving systems services efforts. And some special creds for this session. This session's content was developed initially through funding and support from the Innovations Institute at the University of Connecticut as part of a webinar series that Youth Move National, presented in partnership with them. And if you'd like to check out our initial webinar series, those sessions were also recorded, and you can access them at this link that I am dropping in the chat. All right. So as a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health experiences will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, including everyone from state leaders to providers to the school workforce, infant and early childhood providers, community-based providers, peer supervisors, and peer supports, right? Family partners, youth partners, and much more. Our services range from individual consultation to more in-depth sessions like the one we're offering today. So please do be sure to check out all of our amazing resources and archived presentations on our website, or go to the Contact Us link there to request consultation or training. And I will also drop that in the chat for folks. All right. So just some common FAQs, right? Frequently asked questions and some answers to those, right? So in the follow-up email for today's session, you will receive a certificate of completion, a link to the recording of this session, and a copy of the slide deck presentation that's being shown. In addition, you will also receive a companion tip sheet that you can use to access resources and also include some additional information, sort of recapping the highlights of this session as well for you to have following this presentation. You should maybe have already received the slide deck ahead of today. And if not, again, it will be sent to you following this session. All right. So a little bit more about who we are at Youth Move National. And again, thank you all so much for being here. For folks who maybe joined us more recently, I think we have the folks we've had from the start. But again, this is centering youth in crisis response systems as users and designers within these efforts. And I was giving a little bit of a spoiler on sharing a bit about Youth Move National, but first let's talk about who we are as presenters in this space, right? So I can go first. My name is Shane McDonald. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. And I am a youth program coordinator with Youth Move National. I am also involved in a lot of work that we do in partnership with NTAC. I will share that I am coming to you from the occupied and unceded land of the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Penobscot, and many other indigenous peoples, which under settler colonialism is known as Massachusetts. I've been with Youth Movement National for, I think, a little over 3 years now. And I'll also share in service of this conversation that I am someone with firsthand lived experience of navigating crisis services as a young adult. This was pre-988, right? But some of my experience involves outpatient programs, inpatient units, and being voluntarily and involuntarily hospitalized. So my stake in this conversation is both professional and personal, as I know it is for many of us, and I'm just really grateful to be here. Passing it to you, AG.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Amanda Grace Creer. Feel free to call me AG. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a youth program specialist here at Youth Move National. I'm coming to you from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which if you are unfamiliar with Pennsylvania, that is about 2 hours outside of Philly in good old Amish country. I am also a person with lived experience. I also am a certified peer specialist here in the state of Pennsylvania, and my lived experience with crisis response systems is that I'm a family member. I'm a loved one of somebody who has had to navigate the crisis system, as well as being a suicide loss survivor as well. And I'm really excited to be in this space with you and share this content with you because it's something that really speaks to my heart and is really, really a passion of mine. So back to you, Shane.
Thanks, AG. Just a few more little intro bits before we dive into the good stuff, right? So a little bit more about who we are and what we do at Youth Move National. Youth Move National, MOVE standing for motivating others through voices of experience, is, and of course, national, youth-driven organization really devoted to improving youth-serving programs and systems by uniting the voices of individuals who have firsthand lived experience across these systems, which include the mental health system, the juvenile justice system, child welfare, education, and other systems actively seeking to serve young people. And in line with our mission, again, that MOVE, motivating others through voices of experience, we have united to utilize our experiences and skill sets to affect positive change through all sorts of things: youth advocacy, youth leadership development, youth engagement and change management and implementation, providing training, technical assistance, youth adult partnership and leadership trainings and guidance, youth and youth track conference planning and delivery, distance and peer learning around youth engagement, and chapter development. So we do a whole lot. And in terms of chapter development, we have a chapter network that consists of, I believe, at least 70 chapters across the country. And these are spaces where young leaders are working in their local communities, trying to advocate and provide leadership opportunities for young people to be involved in decisions and efforts that impact them on a local level. And why do we do this work, right? What is our vision? Youth Move National really envisions a future in which young people are no longer treated as numbers, problems, or caseloads, but as humans whose struggles, perspectives, and leadership are important as well as imperative to informing meaningful community and systems change. And we are going to be getting into some intensive content and topics, right? So we do want to give a little bit of a content note. Please do honor your right to self-care across this session, as we are going to be referencing trauma and systemic harm. And the sort of little grounding coming together as we move through the rest of the session together, right? Together, ideally, we share a commitment to ourselves and to each other as fellow travelers in the human experience, if you will, in these journeys. we wear dual hats, right? Both as guides and explorers towards individual, relational, and ultimately collective liberation. Our path is or should be rooted in empathy, understanding, and inclusivity. It's really about empowering youth to define their own journeys through crisis and co-designing the services that support them. So, with all of that, let's embark on this journey together and ultimately center youth voices in any and every way we can. So, objectives for today. Hopefully, these all ring true for folks at the end of this session, right? So, during this presentation, we will work to understand the benefits of partnering with youth in crisis response services, learn best practices for supporting young people collaboratively, respecting their self-determination, explore the crisis continuum and effective engagement strategies at each phase of it. Recognize the importance of integrating youth voice and leadership in crisis service design. And finally, evaluate strategies to ensure meaningful participation and influence of young people in decision-making processes for these crisis services. And if you have questions as we move through our content, we have a lot to cover, but we will have Q&A at the end. So please do note those questions. And again, we will open up for all questions and thoughts towards the end of this session. I think I have just one last thing before I pass it to AG. We will be using Menti polls for this session to provide some opportunities for engagement while saving us a little bit of time to move through a whole bunch of stuff. So with that being said, you can access this Menti link in several different ways, and it is one link that contains all questions that we will be asking. So you can scan the QR code on this screen with your phone if you'd like to do it mobily. I think maybe you could do that with a tablet too, potentially, but it should work across any kind of virtual device, right? A phone, a tablet, an extra tab on your screen, as long as you don't lose this space, right? And again, it's one link. So and we're about to introduce the first poll. Once you answer it, just keep that link open as the next poll for you to answer will appear when we get to it. That being said, we will repaste the link for folks who end up joining us late, and if folks need access to it and accidentally close it out. But for now, we'll move on. And I guess for quick access, to throw the direct link in the chat. I believe if you scan the QR code, you just jump right into the poll. If you click on this link, it also jumps you right into the polling. However, if you type in menti.com, that's when you need to put in this code that is highlighted here. Just give a little bit of space for that. Awesome. All right, AG, passing it to you, I believe. Oh, no, I lied. I'm doing one more thing. Sorry, y'all. I'm introducing our first poll. Let's try this out. Now that I've given y'all access to getting into these polls, we're going to open up with the first one. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and actually share the poll itself and ask this question for y'all to answer. One moment. And if you are not interested in engaging in this polling, that is totally okay too. Totally optional. So that being said, folks are already on this, right? Our first question is, how familiar are you, before we dive into all of our considerations and overview, with the concept of youth-driven decision-making within crisis response systems? And it's multiple choice. You should be able to select one of these answers, right? You're very familiar, somewhat familiar, or this is a completely new topic to you, which is all totally okay. I'm just curious around folks in this space. So I think based on the folks that we have in the room, most folks have answered this, and it seems like most folks have some level of familiarity with this topic. However, a couple folks are new to it, and absolutely, thank you so much for being here to learn a little bit more. Okay, now I believe I'm passing it to you, AG, and hopefully folks can see my slides okay.
Awesome. Yep. All good. All right. Well, as we are going to be discussing the importance of authentic engagement and partnerships with youth across crisis response systems, we wanted to go over some foundations to really solidify some of the framework that we are going to encourage you approach this through. So when we define youth engagement, we define it as a strategy in which youth are given meaningful voice and role and are authentically involved in working towards changing the systems that directly affect their lives. So in the world of youth engagement, authenticity is a key piece here. It's more than just token gestures or service level consultations. It's about genuinely listening to young voices, to valuing their contributions and partnering with them in meaningful ways to directly inform meaningful change. And youth engagement isn't about sharing power as adults with young people. It's really about building power. It's about giving young people the tools and the resources and the opportunities to drive change, to challenge the status quo, and to shape their own futures as well as the futures of other young people like them. So in centering youth voice, in centering youth voice and authentic engagement, it is essential to youth shaping their own healthcare experiences. Research is showing that active engagement leads to better outcomes, to reduced costs, and greater satisfaction with healthcare settings. The Center of Advancing Health highlights that engagement is not just passive involvement, it is active participation. Yet, the healthcare system often falls short in making engagement accessible. However, the benefits are vast and extending to everyone involved. I'm going to say that again, that the benefits are vast and it extends to everyone involved. When we prioritize youth voice, we foster partnerships that are essential in redefining how we approach crisis intervention and support services. So engagement isn't just a choice. It is a necessity. It requires us to listen, to learn, and to co-create solutions that reflect diverse needs and experiences of youth that are navigating the crisis system. So let's embrace the challenge and the opportunity of authentic youth engagement, and recognizing that together we can work to create a system of care that really truly centers and uplifts youth voices. So in doing that, we are going to introduce the Lofquist spectrum of attitudes. When we're talking about meaningful youth engagement and meaningful youth support, we emphasize the need to move towards doing with, using this concept here of Lofquist, I can never say this word, Lofquist's spectrum of attitudes. This is an interesting concept that explores how young people are engaged in services and systems, including crisis services. It's like a journey of how different organizations or systems approach involving young people. And at the beginning of this journey, you often find situations where decisions are being made for or to youth, where adults are taking charge without really involving young people. But here is where the real transformation takes place. It's the one in blue. It's when we approach doing things with youth. It means working together side by side as a team. So why is this shift so incredibly important? Well, when organizations choose to do with youth, they're essentially saying you, as a youth, aren't just so when organizations choose to do things with youth, they're essentially saying you, as a youth, you aren't just the issue. You're also part of the solution. This approach recognizes that young people have very unique insights and experiences that can make a significant impact. So now, when you apply this concept to crisis services, doing with youth means that these services don't just decide what is best for youth, that they are listening to what youth believe is best. Youth are included in decisions that directly affect them and how they receive support during these challenging times. And it's about ensuring that these services are not just for youth, but also co-created by youth as well. So when organizations move from doing for or doing to youth and move towards doing with youth, it supports youth and young adults in navigating crisis services more effectively. Beyond that, it's about making these services better for everyone. The insights and the ideas from youth can lead to positive changes, improving the ways crisis services operate and making them also more effective. And there are so many amazing benefits to authentically engaging with youth and young adults, but we're just going to touch on a few today because, we only have so much time together. First, authentic youth engagement can change the way systems and services operate and behave. When young people are involved, organizations often become more open and more flexible. They start to think differently and value diverse and important perspectives, leading to positive changes in their culture and their practices. Next, youth engagement is crucial when it comes to creating new policies. Young people have unique experiences and insights, and involving them can lead to policies that are more relevant and effective for young adults. They also help ensure that the policies not only look good on paper, but they're also working well in real life. Engaging young people also helps to build awareness and understanding among many different groups. Adults get a better grasp of challenges and the needs of young people, while young people learn about the complexities of decision making. This mutual understanding can lead to more effective solutions and collaborations. And when young people are actively involved, it also helps them to develop and believe in their abilities, known as self-efficiency. They gain confidence, they learn new skills, and they start to believe that they can truly make a difference. This is a very powerful motivator and can drive positive change. Authentic engagement also fosters a really strong sense of community. Young people feel like they belong and they're an integral part of a group or an organization. This sense of belonging can lead to increased motivation and commitment and a desire to contribute positively to the community. Lastly, engaging young people authentically improves outcomes for individuals and organizations all alike. Young people develop personally and professionally, while organizations benefit from fresh ideas, from increased creativity, and better decision making. So as you can see, authentic youth engagement, it's a win-win for everybody involved. It leads to positive changes, to better policies, more awareness, personal growth, and a sense of community and improved outcomes for everybody involved. And that is why it's so important for organizations and communities to actively and genuinely involve young people within their efforts. All right, so we are now going to talk about the ladder of involvement. The ladder of involvement is like a guide that helps people who want to collaborate with young people in a more meaningful way. It's a tool inspired by what is called Hart's Ladder for Youth Participation. If you're not familiar with it and you want to look it up, HART is spelled H-A-R-T, so it's Hart's Ladder of Youth Participation. And this ladder helps us understand different levels of youth involvement in decision-making, from just having young people around for them to really, sorry, my words today, from just having young people around for show to them really taking the lead. So we have this ladder here, think of it as the steps of a ladder. The lower steps, they're not so great, like manipulation, where young people are just used just to look good, but not really heard. And then there's decoration, where young people are involved, but for appearances, and they don't really make decisions. And tokenism, where you're given a voice, but it's not being heard and it's not changing the status quo. Now, the good stuff kind of starts on the sixth rung, where assigned but informed young people are given a role in decision making, but they're not, a part of the whole picture. At the fifth rung, consulted and informed, young people are a part of the decision making process and their opinions matter, but they might not have a final say. The fourth rung is adult initiated shared decisions with youth. Here, young people work with adults as equals to make decisions, but the goals are set by adults. The third rung is true partnership, youth and adult initiated and directed, where young people and adults work together toward equally shared goals. The second rung is youth initiated and directed, where this is where young people take the lead and adults step back and they're just there for support. Young folks are in charge of making decisions and the adults, they're there to offer guidance. And at the very top of our ladder here is youth-led decision making, where young people, they have complete control. We aim for this top rung, but we understand that sometimes it's not possible due to factors like age or resources. But even if we cannot reach the very top, we can still climb the ladder and aim for higher levels of youth involvement. This ensures that young voices are heard and that they can shape their communities. Recognizing and valuing young people's contributions helps build trust between youth and adults and making decision making more effective and engaging for everybody involved. So the ladder of youth involvement is a tool that helps us to work better with young people by including them in a way that truly matters. It's all about making sure that youth voices are heard and that their ideals are valued. So this leads us into our Menti poll. This Menti poll is twofold, and it's going to be one theme, but two questions. So folks can respond to the questions that resonate with them, their audience or audiences that they may represent, that you may represent. So we are going to take this opportunity to answer the two polls, and we're going to open one at a time. And if one of these does not apply to you, that's completely all right. You can just put an A. And I welcome everybody into the room that was not here in the beginning. I see we have a lot more folks that have joined us along our journey today.
And I can also jump in just a hot second too to share that totally understandable that there was maybe some miscommunication around timing for this session. So rest assured, if you joined us more recently, no worries. The session's being recorded and you will have access to a link for the full recording to be able to catch the beginning of this session. But we did just kind of go over some intro bits and foundational pieces to youth engagement, and we're going to be getting more specifically into considerations within the continuum itself right after this poll. So if folks do need access to the poll, let me refine the chat box and I can drop. I've been trying to kind of re-drop that that link in the chat, but you should be able to click right on that either on a phone, on a tablet, or on your device if you'd like to answer this. And I'm already seeing answers coming up.
All right. As an adult, what are the largest obstacles that you have faced or anticipated facing in engaging youth as partners within crisis response services? We got a lot of really great answers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think getting at a lot of kind of important considerations for this partnership, right? It's not just about recruiting these young people, it's ensuring they feel comfortable once they are recruited and engaging in these spaces, right? So youth having confidence or language around what they need from crisis response services might have to do with not, fully having that language or understanding of that jargon involved within that system as well. And I see you, Marlon, in the chat. Yeah, this should be like these polls should absolutely be accessible with a phone as well. So definitely dropping that in the chat. And if you do, like I see you too, Carla, absolutely appreciate you dropping in the chat. And if this is inaccessible for folks as well, please do feel free to answer in the chat as well. But even, just sort of this consideration for a trauma-informed approach to this type of engagement with young people, burnout and overwhelm being real. Yeah, all of these pieces are things that not only I resonate with in conversations that I've been a part of in this sphere, but have also been absolutely voiced by other folks who have stake in these efforts as well. So thank you. We're gonna keep rocking and rolling because we got a lot more to cover. And for folks that are just joining us, don't X out of this link. We will open up the next poll once we get to it, and it's the same link for all of them. So yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Shane, for assisting with the tech support there. We are going to keep moving. And now we wanted to highlight our next piece here, the importance of continuously assessing youth voice and increasing best practices in your approach in your work. Youth Move National has a couple tools that may be helpful in this way. So the Youth Best Practices Committee at Youth Move National recognized a crucial need to delve into what truly supports youth voice within organizations and systems. So their insights highlighted 3 key objectives, which you see here on the screen. The first one is to clarify the resources and commitments required to amplify youth voice effectively. The second one is to prevent the unnecessary duplication of efforts and minimizing distress and ensuring a cohesive approach across initiatives. And the third one is to provide organizations with a tailored, data-driven framework for developing, implementing, and advancing youth-driven activities. So to enhance best practices in this regard, Youth Move National has developed 2 innovative tools designed to support organizations in assessing and amplifying. My words are like blah, blah, blah today. Amplifying authentic youth voice. So these tools that we have are the youth voice at the agency level, or our YVAL, and the youth voice on committees and councils, or our YVOC assessments. These assessments offer a structured framework for identifying key indicators for a meaningful and successful youth voice within program design, whether it's at an agency level or within a council and committee structure. By engaging the assessment process, organizations embark on a collective and reflective journey, gaining insights into their current level of youth engagement and fostering a shared vision for success. Through the YVAL and YVOC, organizations can pinpoint strengths and address areas of need and chart a course towards a sustainable youth engagement process. These tools not only empower young people to advocate for meaningful participation, but also enable organizations to assess the impact of technical assistance and interventions, ensuring continuous improvement and growth, centering youth voices and perspectives. You can access more information and even request a version of these assessments for you to do independently by clicking the link on the slide, which we will have sent out to everybody if you haven't already received the slides. And you can also request technical assistance from us to support you in interpreting strengths and offering feedback around strengths and growth areas, and offer a consultation on the best ways to implement improvements as well. So that brings us now to our other poll that we mentioned. So we are going to take this opportunity to do these two polls. We're going to open again one at a time. And if it doesn't apply to you, that's all right. You could just put NA. So it is as a young person or family member with experience using or informing crisis services, what are the largest obstacles in being engaged as equal partners? That's a good
Nice.
question. We have in the chat, what age range does young person refer to? That's a good question. Because
Yeah,
I think
typically in our definitions, we mean 29 and under. That being said, it's a little bit broad and not necessarily like a finite answer, because what youth and young adult, especially within these crisis response systems, is categorized as, or what those age brackets are, depends on where those services are and varies across geography. So that is all to say, like, just kind of a general idea, 29 and under, but also feel free to approach this through the lens of what youth and young adult is defined as in your community as well. So yeah, and for folks who, I know that there are folks that are just joining us too, and might be looking for the link to actually be able to respond to these polls, and I am just throwing it in the chat as well. But folks can absolutely also feel free to drop thoughts in the chat instead of using this Menti if that's helpful. And I do see some responses, inconsistency. Definitely appreciate that, Scarlett, in the chat. And then we have a whole bunch of awesome examples on screen too. I think that folks noted with the first or the last poll that we had that trust was definitely a barrier, which is totally real, and a reality for sure. I'm just scrolling down because I'm trying to, I guess I can't capture all of this on the same screen, but just a little bit of insight into perspectives of folks in this space. Program planning not always including youth voice, right?
we have some in the chat too. Trust, lack of understanding, cultural aspects. Ooh, that's one that a lot of people don't always think of is
Yeah,
cultural.
there's
Yeah.
cultural context and relevance, and accessibility, right? And then on this other side too, problematic and harmful narratives, like what's noted here: family members, guardians, caregivers, disengaging and relying on crisis providers to fix youth, right? Even this idea of needing to fix people who are experiencing crisis is a harmful narrative, right? Youth as a demographic often are dismissed and excluded due to just their age. So again, all of this absolutely relevant. I'm sure that folks across this space resonate with different examples shared by other folks. And again, thank you for dropping your thoughts. And I see more folks in the chat. Thank you. Miscommunication, mutual understanding, maybe lack thereof, right? Yeah, a lot about trust, which I absolutely appreciate, because that's part of our role and service of this conversation, right? Is reestablishing, earning that trust from youth who may understandably have gone through some like troublesome experiences within these systems and maybe have lost a lot of trust, right? Or maybe these efforts aren't culturally or otherwise accessible, right, in the ways that they're being shared. So awesome. All right.
All
So,
right.
oh, never mind. We have one more question. I'm sorry. We have these doubles. I'm getting confused. Okay. So, this first question was for, if you're a young person or a family member, you may be someone who's kind of wearing both hats in this space, as someone who is working within this realm and someone who has firsthand experience in moving through these services. So, just the second question. Sorry, y'all. Yeah, I'm like, I think of that in the right space. Might have gotten a little tripped up with tech, but yeah, this is where okay, this is where we're at, right? So for folks working in this sphere, if you are aware, do you currently have a method to assess the impact of meaningful youth participation? And I see the majority of folks are saying, okay, the majority is getting smaller, but it seems like there's a decent amount of no's, but then otherwise it seems like it is an active effort and conversation for others. So that is awesome. And and I will just move us on to this next one just because we're moving through time very speedily. So this is sort of, for youth and families with this experience. Again, if you are someone who answered that previous question and this still applies to you, please feel free to answer this as well. But are you aware of, involved in opportunities to share feedback and inform improvements in these services? And I tried to, there was this little kind of thing to toggle where I could compare answers from the last poll to this one. But yeah, the answers aren't totally the same between, but just noting that, for folks who shared that, yes, they are aware and involved in opportunities, there were folks that said that, yes, they have opportunities available. So that's kind of giving a little bit of a gauge of, opportunities available versus the level of like accessibility, visibility of those opportunities to youth who might be interested in, right? So I think this ended up turning this visually very funky, but regardless, it seems like folks are actively involved, if not interested in becoming involved. So definitely something to think about.
All
All
right.
right,
Cool.
let's keep it going.
All right. So for sake of time, we're just going to keep on cruising through our content for today, and we're going to move right into virtual engagement. So we understand that now more than ever, systems and services are utilizing technology and virtual engagement to expand upon their efforts. This is absolutely essential for crisis response services. So first, the COVID-19 pandemic has compelled individuals and organizations to explore virtual alternatives to in-person interactions, kind of forcing us to adapt quickly to the remote work, online education, and virtual events that needed to happen. So while this transition has presented challenges such as internet connectivity issues, technical difficulties, and struggles with recruitment and retainment, it has also forced us to confront and address accessibility barriers. So by making virtual platforms more available and more accessible, we can support disabled youth and youth in general that are facing safety and accessibility barriers to participate fully, regardless of their physical location. Secondly, virtual engagement has exposed gaps in accessibility and highlighted the importance of inclusive design. So we are starting to notice that more of the inclusion features like closed captions, like sign language interpretation, and screen reader compatibility. These efforts not only benefit individuals with disabilities, but they also cater to those with different learning styles, language preferences, and sensory sensitivities. Even further, the increased reliance on virtual platforms has pushed technology advancements and innovation. Developers are now actively working to improve accessibility features and create more intuitive user surfaces that cater to a wider range of users, which we imagine and hope will continue now post-pandemic. So Youth Move National uses several virtual platforms for engagement, like I think it's Miro, M-I-R-O. I think that's how we pronounce that. Mural, Menti, like we just used. We also use Kahoot and even the whiteboard feature on Zoom. So although virtual engagement still remains a challenge during the COVID-19 pandemic and now in our world, it has provided us with a unique opportunity to enhance accessibility through digital platforms. And it's important that we continue to adapt services and efforts to be virtual or to be hybrid whenever possible, and consider flexibility across platforms and timeframes and desired means of engagement. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Shane.
All right. Thank you so much, AG. I just realized I wasn't muted and I was typing a bunch. So if you were hearing keyboards, that is totally my fault and I apologize. That being said, we have a bunch more content to get through. And I will say that, again, for folks that maybe just joined us, that there was some maybe confusion around the timing of this session. So we may go a little bit over the 3 p.m. like Pacific time marks, or we might reach that point. Anyway, that is all to say we have a decent amount to get through, and we're going to keep going. And depending on what your what your understanding of the time frame was for this session might be a little different. And that being said, too, this is also being recorded, so you'll have access to the full endeavor in a follow-up email. So awesome. All right, let's dive into the actual continuum, right? We've done a lot of this foundational kind of framing, right? But let's actually jump into some considerations specific to centering youth moving through this continuum in the ways that we've shared, right? So starting with what is this crisis response continuum, right? So the specifics of what mobile crisis and crisis response services in general look like is very much subjective to different states, right? It does not look the same everywhere. And I imagine folks in this space might be familiar with that, right? So typically, though, there are three main components or phases of this continuum, right? This first piece, this someone to contact, right, are these 24/7 crisis call centers, lifelines, right, 988. And then the second phase, the mobile crisis outreach teams after that initial point of contact, if there is an ask to have folks come and meet with folks on site, that would be those mobile crisis outreach teams, right? And then everything that comes next in moving through and beyond that initial experience of crisis and interaction with these services, right? So that's a system to support, which includes, of course, crisis receiving facilities and like stabilization programs, and also, and ideally, right, community-based and in-home supports. And that like ongoing network of supports, again, beyond that initial experience of crisis. So across each phase of this continuum, I want y'all to think about what it means to meaningfully partner with young people across their experiences of crisis and navigation of these services, as well as with youth to inform these services. And I see from Tiffany, intensive in-home is kind of all three. Yeah, that's real too. This is not like all comprehensive, right? This is sort of like overarching umbrellas, if you will. And just a little note about needs of the family. Throughout a lot of these conversations that we've been a part of, we've heard a lot about centering the needs of the family, right? And we really need to think about this intentionally because unfortunately, in many cases, the needs of the family tend to dissolve and really clearly focus on serving the concerns, definitions, desires of the parent, caregiver, the adults surrounding that young person in crisis, often over their narratives, right? And it's absolutely real and valid that these crisis situations for youth have a significant impact on the adults and family members around them, right? And it's also understandable that parents and caregivers want to reclaim that agency and autonomy from providers in a similar way that youth are advocating for. However, that never means that a young person's voice, choice, and definition of crisis should be treated as secondary. So that's just our little note on the needs of the family, right? It's also important to really kind of consider what consent and assent looks like, depending on what your sort of age bracket is for youth and young adults in your community and within your services, right? And as much as possible, really considering and ensuring that youth have a right to consent for any sort of services and supports that they may be offered in this realm, right? And if folks are declining supports, services, treatment, right, we should not focus so much on the fact that they are not reaching out or seeking that support, but why they are not reaching out, right? Are these opportunities not accessible? Have they been harmful for folks in the past, right? All of these different factors could be the case for youth who may be feeling disconnected or don't want to engage with these services, right? So that's a piece of this conversation as well. And in service of ensuring that these services and opportunities to inform these services are accessible to young people, we need to make sure that we break down jargon, right? As someone shared, young people feeling really comfortable and oriented and being involved in these conversations really requires a lot of guidance, mentorship, again, orientation, this sort of like onboarding, right? And if there's any sort of use of buzzwords, right, especially if we're kind of using more of these overarching taglines, right, like centering the needs of the family, we really need to define and be clear about what we mean by that, right? So just a little bit more of this framing, right? Um, and ultimately, we should be supporting young people and advocating for themselves, right? And that includes supporting them to collaborate with others, including across these services. And something that we share often is that successful collaboration is really built on understanding the difference between positions and interests, which, putting it simply, positions are what we want, right? It's the stance that people, agencies, decision makers take, but typically provides little insight into their motivation, their intentions, the context behind the positions they hold, right? Whereas on the flip side, interest is that why, is that context, why I want a certain thing, why I want to move forward in a certain direction, why I hold a certain opinion, right? It explains the values, motives, and reasons for a position. And true resolution comes from understanding a person's interests, right? The reasons why they want what they want. And knowing that why can really open up doorways for collaboration and collective benefit across everybody involved, while of course prioritizing that young person in crisis, right? So sort of this shift from really focusing on the rigid positions that we hold within conversations where there are differing perspectives, goals, desires, needs, right? And really focusing on the context that could bring folks together, right? It's really seeking that why. It's really engaging in that active listening and constructive and sincere dialogue, right? Trying to lead without judgment and really understand that like folks are coming from their own context, their own lived experiences, right? Um, and again, as you're sort of coming together and working around solutions as a group, or a support network for any young person in crisis, whether you are a natural support or a formal support, really focusing on interests rather than positions is super important, because solutions that focus on this position-based thinking often fuel conflict and add more less than ideal energy to the conversation, right? Whereas solutions and conversations really focusing on these interests tend to diffuse conflict and bring folks into a place of greater resonance and connection around supporting that young person and moving forward in a meaningful way. So just another way to kind of frame this, right? It's also important, I'm sure we're all aware that there is a lot going on in our world right now and always, right, in terms of these larger issues within and outside of this country that might be impacting young people's experience of trauma or informing it, right? So these aren't, this isn't a poll necessarily, right, but just a kind of question to consider and reflect on as you move through and beyond this space, right? But how are you, if you are involved in working within these services and in this sphere, right? How are you holding space for young people to discuss and share their feelings about ongoing social issues that may be impacting them, right? Do you have like virtual town halls or convenings where young people can share their experiences? Do you have support groups and community conversations where young people can really share how these bigger issues are impacting them, right? And ultimately as well, we as folks working in systems, if folks in this space resonate with that, right, are in part accountable for creating meaningful change in service of reducing some of this larger level harm, right, including systemic oppression. So that's another focus as well, right? Not just really intentionally supporting and collaborating with youth on a more direct level, but also on this wider level, advocating for greater change in service of widely diminishing experiences of trauma and crisis for young people, ultimately, right? And just some themes to kind of carry through all of the more specific considerations that we give across phases, right? All of these things should be honored as much as possible for youth and young adults moving through these services or working to inform these services in collaboration with systems and services, right? So again, all of these things are super important. I think we may have sort of noted some of these things and we'll reference them again as we move through more specifics, right? But of course, participation and empowerment, really uplifting young people's inherent power, as AG kind of framed that, right? And really centering their autonomy and dignity. Equity and accessibility, we've talked about, right? Folks have shared some sentiments around, really, really important. We haven't dove into this like super deeply, right? But harm reduction, meeting young people where they're at, really giving folks grace and space for taking smaller steps towards greater goals. is really important within these services and is also in service of this overarching ideal trauma-informed approach that we should take to this work as well. Social inclusion and connectedness is super important, especially for young people who might feel a level of disconnected from themselves and their communities as a result of being in these spaces of crisis, right? So reconnecting them to their communities, to their supports, to their networks is super important. We wouldn't be who we are at Youth Move National if we didn't uplift peer support and meaningful peer involvement within every part of this continuum and within this sphere, any and everywhere, essentially, right? And then response to basic needs. In many situations of crisis for young people, there are there is a lack of basic needs, right? Whether it is financial security, housing security, academic security, all of these different things, right? And oftentimes in this gauging of basic needs, as crisis response systems, services, supports, right? We can connect or even maybe directly offer things to serve those basic needs, which may very greatly reduce the intensity of their experience of crisis, work to support them moving beyond it. And again, ultimately a lack of basic needs or a scarcity of basic needs could at the very least inform a young person's experience of crisis. And it's always important to check in around those things, right? So you got kind of two lanes here, right? So considerations for partnering with youth in both navigating and informing these services. First, we're going to focus on some considerations for partnering with youth who are themselves going through crisis experiences and are utilizing these services, right? So for this first phase, someone to contact, of course, we prioritize youth-defined crisis because the reality or the belief that it's impossible to be heard and understood is often a big part of a young person's experience of crisis. And let's be honest, right, their experience of the world at large. And being present with and holding space for youth in crisis should involve gauging their tolerance for and comfortability with others present or who may be called in to be involved, as well as prioritizing their deconstruction of the crisis and what that means to them in their own words, right? We also need to value transparency, as we shared, right? We need to be transparent about any level of tracking or lack of anonymity in this initial outreach to these call or text centers, right? Young people have a right to know and a right to privacy wherever we can honor them, right? And in addition to transparency, accessibility, again, also important. We really need to build infrastructure for multiple points of access, inclusive of text, online, virtual ways to reach out for crisis support. As I imagine folks in this space understand this, right? Youth and young adults don't always feel comfortable with a phone call, right? So increasing accessibility in this sphere, in this phase in that way is super important. And again, in addition to their defining of the crisis, it's important to engage in active and reflective listening and dialogue with an emphasis on self-determination of ongoing engagement. It's really important to give young people their options for next steps and work with them to shape them around their desires or interests, right? And then again, peer involvement. Peers should, peer supports young people with firsthand lived experience moving through these services should absolutely be recruited as staff, as operators of these call centers, these tech centers, right? At the very least, in addition and available to youth outside of other trained responders. We are moving right through time, but that's okay. Someone to respond. First and foremost, and we'll note this again in a little bit, we emphasize the complete avoidance of police presence because the hard truth is the mental health system does grow alongside systems of oppression, right? Capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism all exist within its roots and unfortunately continue to influence the system even now. And of course, these ideals disproportionately harm youth of color, 2S, LGBTQIA+, and disabled youth, right? Historically and presently excluded populations. And in order to create an anti-oppressive or justice-oriented approach to crisis response services, as with all mental health services, they must also be anti-carceral, which, putting it simply, ensuring that we're shifting away from anything that removes power, agency, control, self-determination away from people, right? And that includes more restrictive treatment environments like locked psychiatric units, right? With more of a focus and an ultimate try to shift and support towards returning to community and those in community supports that are more in alignment with folks' day to day, right? And less life disrupting, interrupting, right? And as I shared, right, like mental health is something that in a lot of ways has been rooted in oppression and in some ways is still kind of holding on to some of those ideals and initial narratives, right? So it's important that even beyond avoidance of police presence, that we really think through and reflect on the ways in which that we might be kind of falling into these carceral places and approaches, right? Really making sure that we are always honoring that autonomy and self-determination of youth and not coming from this place of fear, right? So much so that we are putting up barriers to youth having that right? Uh, Again, peer involvement. We emphasize peer support is essential across the continuum. So youth peers with firsthand lived experiences being a part of these mobile response teams and on-site engagements with youth. I will share and say and emphasize that peer support is a voluntary service. So that should be something that young person absolutely consents to and says, yes, I do want a peer here. It should not be like an automatic, this peer is going to show up, right? It should be voluntary. What helps, what harms is a framework that I won't go into a whole spiel about now that we developed at Youth Move National, but it's essentially within the name, right? Really collaborating and gauging with a young person in crisis what people, places, and things have been most helpful to them if they've had a similar kind of experience before and moved through it and found helpful supports in that way. And then on the flip side, if there are approaches, spaces, people, providers, medications, things like that that have not been helpful or have been harmful for young people, really gauging and shaping options and choices for ways of moving forward is really important there too. Flexibility of location, right? So again, young people should absolutely have a right to sort of call in who they feel comfortable with to be involved in these conversations. And that can include, being considerate of the space that they're in, right? If you are, or if a mobile outreach team is visiting a youth at their home, right? It might be that young person wants to meet in a specific room or outside of the home, like outside in the, on the front porch. They might want a parent in the room. They might want the parent not in the room, right? Trying to consider all of those things. And then back to this sort of kind of piece of family support and the importance of family voice. Family peer support is absolutely important and valuable. That being said, it is also important that within these crisis services, when we're thinking about incorporating peer supports, that we involve youth peer supports, specifically parent, family member, caregiver, peer supports, as two kind of independent roles that work in tandem with each other, but offer direct supports to relevant parties separately, right? And family peer supports can absolutely be involved, but that's something that we emphasize is that youth peer supports specifically should absolutely be involved within these services, right? And then everything that comes after, right? Again, peer involvement. More so for adults, although for young people, they are becoming more and more prominent. These like community peer run, peer support centers, community centers, community spaces, support groups, collectives, things like that. Absolutely can play a role in this third phase, right? And again, in terms of some of these crisis like receiving facilities and spaces, really we emphasize supporting youth and returning to community and not being removed from it, right? So really trying to focus on in-home and in-community supports. And in terms of these spaces of respite, really sort of intentionally considering what safety really looks like in these spaces, right? Because safety is never a promise or a guarantee, but an ongoing intention with no finish line, right? Because we cannot guarantee that safety is promised for everybody of every lived experience, right? So important to approach that in this way. Again, self-determined continuity of care. Young people should decide if they want to continue on with receiving more services or continuing with supports or kind of shutting that door if they feel comfortable, right? And then accessibility and responsiveness to intersectional identities and experiences, right? If there are young people that are not represented in your services in terms of the language that you use, the folks that are staffing those services, right? It's important that these services are reflective, comprehensive, representative of the communities that they are seeking to serve, right? So really taking into account who, what demographics of young people are not engaging with these services and why that might be, and really kind of consider the level of representation of differing identities, experiences, and cultures within these services. And just some considerations for like youth peer support being woven into this, right? Data justice and confidentiality is important, and that kind of plays a more specific, nuanced role with peers. So really ensuring that youth peers involved in these services are supported and working in alignment with peer ethics and values, and that role strain is not a thing, because that is something that happens for youth peers, right? Really trying to involve peers with lived experience, identities, contexts, cultures, again, that are representative of your communities. And peers can absolutely also support in ensuring that these approaches are trauma-informed as well, and can support equally, as with like other youth in moving through these services, in informing the continuous quality improvement of these services as well. So we have another poll. So let me reshare my screen one moment. And for folks who just joined us, AJ, I don't know if you can find the link and redrop it in the chat for the Menti link, but also if folks just want to share in the chat, that is also totally fine. So this next poll is part 1 of 2. For folks maybe just joined us more recently, we kind of have 2 prongs for certain questions, because we understand that there might be folks in the space who are youth with lived experience or family members of youth with lived experience in these services. So whereas other folks might have that experience and or be folks who work in this sphere. So wanted to make sure that we had this kind of same essential question answerable by both parties. So if this first question doesn't apply to you, just click NA, right? But, oops, sorry, there was one behind. So there we go. Okay, so we just went through all of these considerations for youth utilizing these services, right? So with all that considered and all those sentiments shared, how effectively do you feel that your organization, if you are someone who works at a crisis service organization entity, right? How do you feel that your organization, your state, your community really centers youth voice and partnership with youth in moving through these services as users of these services? And I see a lot of somewhat effective, which is real. And honestly great, because there is never a finish line, right? There's always room to grow and shift and change as the world around us does. And youth absolutely do so. Awesome. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to this kind of second piece of the question, right? So for youth and families with crisis service experience, how well do you feel your needs and perspectives were centered and respected in utilizing crisis response services? And again, if this is not something that pertains to your experience, feel free to select that NA, non-applicable. And otherwise, curious what folks. And it looks like, see some very well, some somewhat well. Okay. Similar answers for both parties, right? I am noting that this representation is happening in a beneficial way, and there's some room to grow, which is always the case, and always okay. So awesome. All right, we're gonna go right back into it, because there's a whole bunch. All right, I think I'm passing it to you, AG. Am I not? If I'm not, that's cool. I'm probably wrong. No? Okay. Interesting. Okay. So then this next chunk involves considerations for youth informing these services. So might be the same youth, absolutely, who move through these services, who might want to inform these services based on their experience. It might be like youth peers that you hire, right? But again, this is sort of a shift towards partnering with youth and informing the design, implementation, and continuous quality improvement of these services.
Wait, you were right. I was on the wrong slide.
Oh, you're great. And
But
I can take it too if you like, whatever you feel
no,
more
you're
comfortable with,
you're
but I'm
good.
not.
I can. That was my fault.
No, you're great.
I was on the wrong. All right. So sorry about that, everybody. Hello. So, in terms of different ways in which crisis response services can meaningfully partner with youth to inform and improve their efforts, there are several ways this can happen. In addition, we would like you to consider, where have you seen youth and families engaged in your efforts? And these roles can be a part of someone's job responsibilities as a lead for youth and family, or someone who may be someone who organizes a youth and family group. This can also be a stipend work for youth and family members, or fall into more structured partnership with an organization via a contract. But most importantly, they can all happen at the same time, and it's not a linear process. It could be more about a specific area that youth and families are engaged in. And finally, this is also something that may be a developmental process of skill development and personal growth for youth and families to feel that they are able to engage in some of these roles. So it is important, in the name of continuously trying to improve quality, to engage multiple youth in your communities over time to provide diverse perspectives. We know that the world is always changing, so the experiences and the needs of young people will shift and change as well, right? I am somebody who, I consider myself a young adult. I'm a young person, but what it was like when I was 15 is not what it is like right now to be 15 years old. That's why this needs to be something that is always actively trying to obtain youth and young adult voice, because the experiences and needs of young people will shift. It's essential to keep bringing in these new voices to the table to review and to inform efforts always. So one of these ways to do this is by engaging youth in identifying what helps and what harms. Shane touched on that a little bit a couple slides ago. But what helps and what harms is the framework that we created at Youth Move National in collaboration with youth that can be used for facilitating conversations where young people can inform best practices by sharing what helps them in achieving success and what is harmful within their lives. These three essential questions are used to guide conversations through these frameworks, which are, in your experience, what do you feel was working for you? The second is, in your experience, what do you feel is not working? And the third one is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do to get the services that you are receiving to be ideal and effective? So we encourage any and everyone who is trying to gain meaningful feedback from youth to replicate this type of framework in conversations within their communities. When we are talking about this phase, how are young people experiencing these initial calls or text messages? How can you create a space for youth who have been through this phase of the continuum to inform meaningful conversation about what's working and what's missing and what needs to change? In addition, if you are looking for where youth in your communities, if you're looking for youth who are in your communities and where you can identify these community assets, look to community centers like YMCAs or JCCs, faith groups, and city or local run youth programming or youth groups. Tapping into already existing youth advisory groups can also provide valuable insights and guidance of how to best engage youth participants in any type of governance or oversight opportunity that you are trying to create, as well as potentially more young people to invite to your efforts. In addition to supporting and identifying community partners and resources, you can and should engage seasoned youth partners as mentors and peer leaders. These young people have already gone through the experience of navigating the mental health crisis and crisis response services and systems, and that they can serve as valuable resources for other young people who are going through similar experiences. As we know, this is the beauty and the uniqueness of and value of peer support. So in terms of this first step of the continuum, these youth mentors and peer leaders can offer follow-ups to those initial crisis calls, even do check-ins over text, which, as we know, can be more accessible form of a form of support to youth, and can even hold group spaces like in-person or virtual support groups to hold intentional, consistent support space for young people that they can access without necessarily diving deeper into the continuum. And that's not ideal or necessary for them, or just something that they know that they can return to long term. It is also important, whether we are partnering with youth as designers or as users of this continuum, that we make an ongoing intentional effort to understand and value youth as individuals with real and valid lived experiences who are experts on their lives and stories. I'm going to say that again. They are the experts of their lives and stories in ways that no one else can be. This all is also so important in terms of working with youth as partners in the design of these services, including what this phase of the continuum looks like. Really honor the individual identities and lived experiences of every young person that you engage in these spaces and conversations. Use language that approaches to have engagement engagement that both empower those young people as well as equip them to feel fully oriented and prepared for any topic or effort that they may be invited to inform. We also encourage, in the name of continuous quality and improvement, to regularly hold spaces and opportunities for young people who are moving through this phase and this continuum in general right now, or who have already moved through this phase, to provide meaningful feedback about what their experience was with these services. Again, you can absolutely use the what helps, what harms framework that we talked about. It's important that we continue engaging multiple youth over time to provide diverse perspectives. In terms of this phase in particular, young people's experiences and traumas around ambulances, sirens, psychologists, clinicians, and other means of traditional crisis response can vary depending on a lot of things, including their identity, their geography, and again, their lived and living experiences. Make sure that you are gaining feedback from youth across identities, systems, and lived experiences. And finally, you can use those connections with youth that you're getting all that important feedback from to inform future partnerships. If there are age gaps that can be filled with meaningful collaborations, those gaps may become clear with these discussions. And then you can continue your connections with these young people by inviting them as consultants to support the evaluation and continuous quality improvement of this phase with all phases of this continuum as well. We just always ask that you try to provide some kind of compensation when partnering with and asking feedback from youth, either financial or through other creative incentives, whatever they may be. So now another note. for the involvement of law enforcement. I encourage you to think deeply about your current partnerships and your collaborations with law enforcement and what steps you can take to create some distance and make some shifts with the ultimate goal of really separating. Because as it's been said throughout these conversations, the ultimate goal should be the absence of the police presence entirely unless it's absolutely necessary. This could mean taking more harm reduction measures, as such as co-response, which I know many folks are doing. Again, harm reduction, we want to emphasize this, but the goal should be no more police involvement, regardless, unless it is 100% absolutely necessary. In addition, it's important to create space for youth who've been negatively impacted by police when in crisis, and when engaging in mental health system in general, and use that feedback to inform the validity and importance of your efforts. And make sure those spaces aren't filled with cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, white youth and young adults who are most often and have drastically different experience with law enforcement personally and generationally. And don't just hold space for this feedback to advocate for the separation from law enforcement, but invite these folks to and recruit them to be used in this decision making as tables to actively inform these services across the board. That brings us to, this might be our last poll. This might be our last poll.
I think we might have one more after this,
Oh,
but
I'll
you're
allow
great.
it.
No worries. That is okay.
All right, so we are going to do this Menti poll again. We can drop it in the chat just in case, because I know some people keep joining us who might not have been here for the last one, and that's completely all right. So I will drop that in the chat again. So here it is. And this one is, as far as you're aware, to what extent is law enforcement involved in your crisis response outreach services?
And there are two kind of pronged questions to this question. However, they are both questions that we believe that everybody in this space, no matter what roles you're wearing, lenses you have on, can answer. So awesome. All right. Oh, I see some not at all. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Very curious to learn where you are and what your services look like and who's involved, how that's structured. And then folks being unsure, totally understandable too, right? And then like this is something that isn't necessarily achievable for some folks, depending on where they're at and the resources available to them, right? So we've heard a lot from folks in rural communities where they don't really have access to more of these like alternative roles and supports, and that the police really are their only kind of resource in this way, right? And there might be spaces where it is still call 911 as a catch-all in any kind of emergency, including a mental health emergency or a self-identified crisis, right? So that is the case where these mobile crisis services, these crisis response services might not be as fully found, grounded, comprehensive, fully implemented in every community, right? So again, this is sort of that ongoing intentional moving towards with ideally a finish line of no police involvement. But again, like it is that moving towards, it's not necessarily you need to get there tomorrow or, there's something wrong. Because again, there's a lot of factors to consider here. So this is the kind of part two, right? So regardless of the extent to which you're aware of the level of police involvement within crisis response services in your community, how open would you be just as a human to exploring alternatives to law enforcement involvement within your crisis response services if they are a little bit more actively involved, right? Also, just noting that we are at the the like end time frame of like one of the two different time frames that I think folks had for this session. So if you do have a hard stop now and need to sign off, that is so okay. Again, this session's being recorded and you will receive the full journey in a follow-up email after this session. But we will be continuing on, and that's true for you, AG, too. Like if you need to scoot early, that is so okay. But
I'm fine. I had this already blocked out till 6 o'clock anyway, so
coolest
6
of
was our
beans.
time.
So we'll keep rocking and rolling. And if you as folks attending, if anybody needs to scoot now, that's okay. You can absolutely catch up on the rest of this journey in that recording. And returning to this, I love it. Folks are very open. I love that no one answered not at all or open. I mean, open but apprehensive is real, right? I mean, like this is a shift. A lot of folks understandably are like, well, if you don't have police and X, Y, and Z is involved, then what, right? There's a lot to this conversation, right? We could have like a whole other kind of conversation around this particular piece, but just ultimately, right, in service of moving away from more carceral or agency removing approaches to supportive folks in crisis and trying to move away from anything that could be additionally traumatizing for folks already going through an already traumatic experience of crisis. Law enforcement is less than ideal, right? So appreciate folks' sentiments around that. And again, definitely understand folks that are maybe feeling a little uncertain about it. And also, I very much appreciate folks noting that they are open to it and acknowledging that it's already an active effort within their communities too. I love that. Awesome. All right. I think that's it for this one. And we do have one more poll at the very end, but we got a little bit more content to go. So, all right. I think we're here, AG.
We are. So now closing out with our third phase, a system to, okay. Sorry, for a second I thought I was muted. I wasn't muted. Anyway, a system to support. Again, this phase includes ongoing network supports such as crisis receiving facilities, stabilization programs, and ultimately and ideally, community and home-based resources and supports. So with this overarching intention to reconnect youth experiencing crisis back to their communities of support, we first want to highlight building a community partnership. That this is essential for identifying and engaging youth participants. Be creative and consider non-traditional support programs and organizations that align with youth's passions and their interests. This approach helps tap into the diverse strengths of young people. For instance, partnerships could include a local arts program, sports teams, or tech clubs to provide more holistic support systems. Once we have identified and engaged youth participants through our community partnerships, we need to draft a partnership description. It's crucial to use clear and accessible language to ensure that everyone involved understands the goals and the expectations. Define roles explicitly to avoid confusion and ensure everyone knows their responsibilities. Also, acknowledge the limitations for change making to set realistic expectations and build trust. For example, our partnership aims to integrate the lived experiences of youth to enhance our ongoing support systems. Each participant will have clearly defined roles with the understanding that while we strive for meaningful change, some limitations exist, and then be clear on what those limitations are. Lastly, gathering feedback from youth is vital to inform and to improve ongoing support systems. In this phase, establishing youth consultants or an advisory group to provide continuous feedback, supporting continuous quality improvement or CQI efforts. This ensures that our services remain responsive to the evolving needs and experiences of the youth that we are aiming to support. So by considering these points, we can build a more effective and compassionate system to support young people through and beyond their experiences of crisis. And to wrap these things up, with all of these considerations we've offered and in working to develop or enhance these meaningful partnerships with youth, we're going to share some key questions to reflect on your readiness. It's not enough to simply recruit young people to inform this work. We need to approach these partnerships intentionally to ensure that they are actually youth-friendly and accessible. So we have these key questions for you to consider, right? Who will support young people engaged in this work? Think about dedicated staff or mentors who can provide guidance and assistance, including youth peer supports. Do your current processes need to adapt or shift to include youth voice? Consider what changes might be necessary to genuinely incorporate youth perspectives. Which young people will you recruit? How will you ensure that they are diverse in lived experience, in age, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, differing disabilities or abilities, and more? It's important to have a recruitment strategy that prioritizes diverse and intersectional representation reflective of youth within your community. What are your goals for this partnership, right? What are the goals? Clearly define what you hope to achieve through involving youth in your crisis response system and ensure that youth are in agreement with those goals. That's important. When are your deadlines for implementing these partnerships? Establish realistic timelines and communicate them clearly to keep your efforts on track. The where is, where will you meet to do this work, right? Where? Ensure that the chosen platforms and spaces are accessible and comfortable for youth to participate fully and offer guidance and support to youth in accessing these spaces if needed. Also ensure that they are youth friendly. Ask youth what that means to them. If it's in person, this can include ensuring that there are refreshments available, right? Everybody likes pizza. It can ensure that there's seating set up in a particular way and for virtual spaces. This could be incorporating background music or having options for breakout rooms for smaller discussions if needed. So I know that was a lot of words, but with all of that, we are going to now move into our last poll. As we note some additional resources and open up for some questions as well. So now it's the last poll.
Thank you, AG. And I appreciate you all across like timing funkiness and tech funkiness and all the things. Again, I'm grateful that this is recorded. I'm actually kind of grateful for this funky overlap because just kind of based on this conversation and the speed in which we've been able to get through content and things, I think 2 hours was probably a safer bet for us than the 90 minutes we had initially. So we've been granted that. So I appreciate that. Awesome. So
our last poll we have here is, how effectively do you feel your community or your state's crisis response services center youth voice and partnership in designing and informing these services? We have some somewhat effective, we have a not at all, and we have somebody that's unsure, and that's okay too.
And I'm here for that. I mean, it's definitely, and I shared this in the chat too, with someone who shared a bit about how, you know, like folks working within like your community's crisis services are in alignment with that moving away from police involvement piece, but like those folks that you might be partnering with from organizations and programs outside of your organization or your specific crisis services are like, you know, we'll call police right away. So it is this greater scale kind of paradigm shift, if you will, on a system service program offering level, as well as in like just communities of folks with lived experience, and just people, right? especially depending on geography, depending on cultural context, lived experiences, identities, all sorts of different things, right? So definitely appreciate that. It seems like the majority are in consensus that there is some level of effectiveness of involving young people and informing these types of services, right? However, there's some room to grow, which is awesome because again, even if we highlighted an example that we shared as an illustration of like best practices, right? Even the best model has room to grow, and that's always a lens to have on, right? In the name of CQI, that continuous quality improvement. Awesome. I think that that's the end of our poll. So yeah, okay, 100%. That is the end of our polling. So whereas we asked y'all, please do not X out of uh, this link. You're absolutely welcome to do that now. So let me reshare my slides one last time, y'all. And we're back. I hope.
All right. I think that's back to you.
Yeah, so definitely not going to introduce each and every one of these links to additional resources. However, we didn't want the conversation to end here, and it shouldn't. Please no, please continue exploring these conversations, no matter what level of active involvement you have within these services. And we have absolutely included some resources that we found really helpful in exploring some of these concepts that we've shared further. So again, y'all will receive both the recording of this presentation, a PDF of the slides themselves, and within that, these links are clickable. And in addition, all of these resources, as well as additional like links to things that have been shared across this presentation and some highlights of specific considerations that we shared across the session are included within a companion tip sheet, if you will, and that will be sent in an email following this presentation as well. So these links are in two different places, and we definitely encourage you to explore these further. And there's a few of them. So with all of everything that we've shared across, what has it been now? An hour and 42 minutes. And grateful to folks too who joined us at like 2 hours ago, right? But we definitely want to open it up for questions before I close out with some kind of closing items, which Joanne, I appreciate you already kind of noted some of those things in the chat too, if folks need to scoot. But and I can reshare just those closing pieces in the last few minutes of this hour. But for now, maybe I can remove my spotlight, make this as close as I can to a room full of people all in conversation with each other as I can, right? But again, we went over a whole lot, and this is not a comprehensive, all things included conversation in terms of the considerations that we shared. There are so many more, or, like that we are necessarily the keepers of all of the best knowledge on how to approach these services and collaborating with youth in this way. So as with, what does youth friendly mean? Ask the young people in your communities, right? Like we can share some sort of overarching sentiments, right? And we kind of have throughout this in terms of accessibility, but also like absolutely, please, please, please gauge those perspectives from youth in your direct local communities as well. Super important. So anyway, I'm going to pause. Do folks have questions, challenges they'd like to share around kind of moving towards anything that we've shared or implementing some of these things we've shared, reflections, highlights, anything? And folks can feel free to drop things in the chat. And just because we have a decent group here, if you would like to unmute and share, you're totally welcome to do that too. But if you could use the raise hand feature just so we can call on you, that would be awesome. And I definitely, I see you, Suzanne. Thank you. I appreciate you. I want to start. I want to speak to everybody's names. Oh my goodness, I want to just get to know each one of you as like a person on the planet. But Scarlett, thank you. Suzanne, thank you. Tiffany, Marianne, thank you. And also, I think I believe I'm like 99.99% sure that there is contact information as well, so that you can continue these conversations with us if you'd like to, as well. Especially if there's some more like kind of nuances, barriers, pieces involved with these services and these efforts in your community, that would be helpful to discuss in a more tailored way with us. We can absolutely offer technical assistance consultation, potentially even some training around this, in addition to this session here. So awesome. AG, I don't know if you have any kind of closing remarks as I stay kind of tuned to the chat for any questions.
I don't know if I have any closing remarks. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. I know that there was some tech stuff, there was some time stuff, but we appreciate you spending your time with us and hearing us, even though my words were kind of jumbled at some time, but that's all right. But yeah, I just appreciate you all being here, and we hope that you're able to take something away from our training here today and back to your communities and really focus on youth voice and yeah, that's kind of it.
Definitely sending some extra love to the East Coasters. AG and I are representatives, so it's a little later in the day, and I was feeling a little jumbly too by the end. So appreciate y'all across like the tech funkiness, the timing funkiness, and any facilitator funkiness. But we're just so grateful to be here. I know that we all have, whether or not you have, professional involvement or formal involvement in this sphere as a workforce, we understand that just as human beings on the planet, we all have a stake in this conversation on a personal level too. So just sending some extra love and energy in service of honoring and acknowledging that too. And I see from Don Rico, I'm interested in training and technical assistance. So I believe that we have like our information on our webs on the tip sheet, but let me make sure. Thank you. Yeah, for NTAC, absolutely. You can go there. And I will say, I think that regardless of either channel, whether you reach out on the NTAG website or the Youth Movement National website, again, like we work in partnership with each other, so the conversations will come, the parties will come together. So that is all to say. Let me just pull it quick. And thank you for dropping even the actual like TA request form. That's awesome. So yeah, like please feel free to request technical assistance through that channel. I will also share, for what it's worth, just the one on Youth Move National's website. But again, either direction will connect back to us. And again, we'd love to support you in your efforts if you are working through implementing some of these things. And also, if you are a young person with firsthand lived experience moving through these types of services, like I am, like AG is, like we shared, just an extra special thank you and appreciation to you for being in this space. I know a lot of this content was more geared towards folks actively implementing these services, but again, hopefully, as we shared, if you are of that audience, you understand that you have a stake in that too, and you should have meaningful opportunities to inform these services. And there's a good chance that there might be opportunities out there based on just kind of the temperature gauges that we've taken throughout today. So awesome, y'all. And yeah, okay, let me get into just our closing pieces. Although if anybody does have any questions that come up, we still have a little bit of time to answer them, but I do want to make sure I get through just our more logistical closing bits. So one more time. Where am I? Okay, here we go. Oh my goodness. Like I said, as somebody apologizing for like getting booted out and bought back in, like technology is a journey, and Zoom just like updated for me, and I swear
Yeah.
I just fully figured it out, and now I'm learning it again. So anyway, all that is to say, appreciate you. And as was shared in the chat, please stay tuned for a follow-up email. We will share the recording, the companion tip sheet, a PDF of the slides that has clickable links in there as well. So stay tuned for that. Please do share your feedback on on your experience of this session, you will receive a link for completing an evaluation, and your feedback is important. We absolutely actively implement it, right? Continuous quality improvement plays a role on the facilitator end of these sessions too, right? Not just in these conversations that we're talking about today. So please do share your feedback and stay connected. We shared some links in terms of requesting TA in particular, but just to kind of stay tuned to all things in the NTAC world, right? You can absolutely access the NTAC website, subscribe to the NTAC newsletter, and if you are on social media, we are on many different platforms, right? Facebook, Instagram, X/Twitter. I think folks are still kind of using both, right? LinkedIn and YouTube. So please do stay connected. Please do continue to reach out to us to continue these conversations. And again, just thank you for being here. We have some other just additional content information, but I think these were also shared in the chat as well. And then this is kind of last little closing statement from Samsung. I think that's all my slides. So I'm going to kind of come back to this room full of virtual people now. I do want to honor folks' time. If folks don't have specific questions, I think that we are good to close out for the day. And again, if after we do close out, you do have a question, you should have access to reconnecting with us. So again, thank you, everybody. And hope to be connected in the future. Take care for now.